Anybody else immediately notice something is missing? Yes, that's right. It is first start and first ride day, guys. Long time coming. But let's flash back to the beginning of the day here. All right, I've got a windy one on a Saturday here, but a couple things I wanted to get done here. And I watch the trees because sometimes when it gets windy, I kind of have to abandon and go in for a bit. 'Cause we have a lot of pasture pine here and we lose a lot of trees. And I don't want to be hanging out here and get tapped on the dome when one of these goes. And it does happen. Not that I get tapped on the dome, but the trees do go. But we are, oh boy. Exhaust is on, motor is sealed up. We have spark. I have been working on the plastics, trying to figure out what it is that I want to do. I've done things like Mr. Cleans, which it's really too fine. If you had plastics that are already in good shape, they can clean them up. But these ones have a lot of flex marks everywhere. I had been trying to figure out how I can better restore the plastics, but ultimately, well, let me take a step back. What are we doing today? Today's plan is to test fire, see if we can get it into an idle. And really to do that, I'm going to do a compression check. We're going to set the gas tank on there so we get some fuel in there. I'm going to hook in the air box and just set the rear plastics on. And then we see. After that, we'll move forward. I've got to tighten down every nut and bolt on here because everything is really just kind of, not everything, but most of this is sitting in place. Axle's loose. Front brakes are loose. Brakes do not have brake fluid, haven't been bled. My kill switch, this guy here, not wired in. I have my connector sitting here, so I just got to grab my tools behind me. Do that quickly. But let's start with trying to get this to a first start, guys. All right, now with the wind, I am hoping that the mic will filter a lot of that out so that you don't have horrible audio for this video. I think we're going to be okay. Let's start with the compression check, and I should say this up front. I have an Amazon compression tester, so it is not a name brand, so it very well could be off. I've been using it for years, so at least I'm used to it as a baseline. The other thing I should say is I can't compression test this against factory spec because of all the porting, polishing, headwork, and all that, the custom nature of this. Let's see what we see. For over 100, it'll run. I have no idea where this is going to land. If you're wondering about this seat, this is not one that I recovered. When I got this in a bunch of milk crates, this one, it came with 2 seats. And that cover was done. The fellow who I bought the ATV from said that a family member had done that for him. So I guess they had some kind of seamstress business on the side, sewing business on the side, and they did that. So it's a great seat cover. Actually really kind of goes with the color scheme. So kind of in homage to the original blaster here, I'm gonna run that. So that's where that one came from. Let's pull this spark plug. This is probably going to be a little tough to see with me standing in the way of the camera with my leg. Here we go. 2, 3. Hella low to start here at 75. I did not hold my throttle open. And I need to hold the throttle open to get an accurate reading here. All right, throttle is now open. Give it a couple of kicks. Same thing, throttle open, 75. Now that reading, if that is actually accurate, is really too low for this to fire. That is horrible. I really want to see over 100 at least. But that is where we are going to start the conversation today. A little disappointed in that. I was expecting a little more. But okay, let's get our air box hooked up and talk about that. Started to mention this because we are using the OEM rear plastics. This is the OEM air intake, a lot longer, whole lot smaller there, diameter for the intake. Let me pop my calipers on there. Factory, I'm gonna call that lip somewhere, oh, I'm in inches. Let's get this over to millimeters. It's a metric bike. 42 if I'm rounding. 42 if I'm rounding there. Now this one here is part of a kit from HPM PowerSports. You'll probably have to reach out to HPM directly for this. I'm not sure if you'd find this on the website, but I needed this for that PWK carb. And as I look inside there, 51 1/4, 52 really as I get set up in there. And I said part of a kit because this is the sleeve. Now there's a lip on this side here, and this end of the lip is going to pop over this side, and I'll clamp on the carb side here. Now this has to be mounted in my plastics, so there's the next step. Here are the rears, and you see they're completely intact, but I have sun fading. I will continue working on these. I plan to drop these plastics on for now to get out and get riding. It's you know, it's one of those things because they're nice new plastics, really makes a quad look nice, but it's a good chunk of money. A full set of plastics for here from Meyer, you know, there's hundreds pushing $1,000 in plastics. So for now we're gonna run these because I am gonna ride this quad. This thing's gonna get scratched. We're gonna call these the racing plastics, the mud plastics, whatever, and I'll put on the dress plastics somewhere down the road. The other thing I'm going to end up doing at some point, not today, is cut these plastics. Yeah, for my OCD, the lack of symmetry on the blaster has always bugged me. Probably gonna end up cutting these off square on both sides. My other blaster is like that as well. The other thing I'll mention is when you buy plastics, you can get the Meyer aftermarket that look more like a Raptor. They're more of that swoop kind of coming off the back. I like this because I like old square body trucks, and the square body rear plastics I think are really cool. So I like this look on the back of a blaster. I just don't like the lack of symmetry. But we're going for first start, so we're gonna get the air intake bolted in here, set this on so we can get to that. To do that, this guy's gonna set down in from the inside, and I have a retaining ring that will go over the outside, but I have one more piece I have to put in here somewhere in my pile of stuff. Here, I'm going to be running a 2-stage Uni air filter. Should talk about this for a moment. The cage that's in here, this is a 3D printed cage. Going to hold up just fine. So I did not go OEM for the cage itself. That's just 3D printer printed. Not bad. But I need this ring, which will hold that, which will set down from the inside through the boot, the intake boot, through the plastic, with a little bit of finagling. And then I'll slip that ring on we'll bolt it. So I'm going to do that and I'll come back to you. All right, now I got to figure out my order of operation for this. It's not a lot of clearance around the carb here to make this all happen, but there is enough. And in case I was wondering, HPM did send me instructions here. Hose clamp on the carb side, so I do have that. And then with the bend, locks over that side. And in the, let's see, the built-in side, use RTV or case bond on this joint for a good tight seal. We're going to do exactly that. Got some wiring in the way, but you can see here I've got this hanger from OEM that you know, in hindsight, not using it on this particular build, could have cut it off, made that space, but now that we're powder coated, etc., I believe I've got enough to get underneath there. So that's what we're going to try and do, slip this on and then get in here. I bet you I can get a small socket, an 8mm socket on here to reach that versus a flathead. Let me see what kind of battle it's going to be to slip this guy on. Very nice, very nice. Our carb is bolted in. You'll also notice running this Z400 shock, I have not cut the plastics, and we're gonna fit. Got all the holes lined up, and I say fit, but let's check a few things for rubbing and clearance. And when I say that, couple things for clearance. On this shock, I can adjust my damping, rebound, and compression. And to do that, to get at that, to adjust the rear, I'm gonna have to lift the plastics off, which implies I'll have to take it off the carb. So that'll happen, you know, again, somewhere down the road as I do tuning, because I can't get in from here. And on the other side, on this shock lower down, I should have another adjustment. Okay, this one's easy here, so I can reach that. All right, let me put the bolts in to hold the plastic down so all that's set in, and at that point we will set the gas tank on. All right, that's in. That air filter is lightly oiled. I really haven't sopped it in oil. I use Keihin oil filter spray. Let me show you the can. Here we go, this stuff. I've been using a Keihin air filter oil, and not because of anything in particular for the Keihin filter oil. There are many that will work. I will say this, I don't run the Keihin style filters on the Blaster. In my limited experience, they just seem very restrictive. I just don't. The Uni 2-stage filter has really been my go-to within the OEM setup here. To talk about the OEM setup. This setup for this kind of built motor, I really haven't seen guys doing this before with this OEM setup. And this is really thanks, again, to the HPM components here. Otherwise, what I have seen is this whole area getting cut out and an aluminum air box being set in here, a CFM air box, or a big sock air intake kind of hanging out exposed. I get into a lot of water and mud, so having this all sealed up, I like the idea. I am looking to try this out with the lid on. I may have to change and do something different, but if I can't effectively run with the lid, I'll have more protection against the mud that I get into here. All right, so we've got that. I need to put some bolts in my LRD. I have not put in my hardware top and bottom here to hold this adjustable LRD in place. The other thing I need to call out is this fairing bolt right here. May be difficult to see, but there are some dings right under my finger in this pipe, and the bolt is too long. So if I were to tighten that bolt anymore, right into the exhaust. So this needs to be trimmed down and adjusted for the fairings. We'll do that later. it's just another one of those details when you're going custom versus OEM. And as you've seen throughout the length of this build, there's an awful lot. Another detail to pay attention to here with this larger exhaust is how I run the brake lines. If I'm not careful, I'm going to melt this brake line on the exhaust. So you see I've spun this up a little bit where I was planning on running it down parallel with the A-arm. I need to create some kind of adjustment. I wanted that down parallel because I don't want any branches or anything grabbing and yanking this. So I've got to give some thought to, because we don't want it to touch up here and melt. What else to mention? We have put oil in. We did that in the last video. Let's get our hardware here and we're gonna set the lid on and we're gonna set our gas tank on next. Didn't get far, guys. With the Z400 shock, trying to get this in, we're not gonna sit down enough. We just aren't. Big gap there, you see, big gap there. If I want to do this and seal this up, ultimately, I've got to cut the air intake off it and just be open flush here. It'll give me a good deal of protection, more than riding open. But that may be something we have to consider right now. I am going to set this aside for the moment, and we're going to first start with that out. Why are these things an important consideration for me? As we try to get this mixture right, how much air I'm letting in through there is going to affect my mixture, how lean, how rich I am, one of those many factors. Having that airbox lid on will affect jetting and performance, and having it off. Ideally, like I was saying, I'd like to have it on to protect things. It's possible I could do some kind of water repellent screen on the top to help protect it. I have to give some thought to it, but before I start customizing things, let's get to a first start and see where we are before I cut things up. Spark plug and gas tank. It's actually a pretty big moment setting this tank off, and I've been going slow on this build for, well, you guys know how long. Starting to look like a quad again. Now we're gonna have to route here, and another piece to talk about, and I try to really slow down and talk about the details on here. It's funny because there's so many little things, as I'm alluding to, getting through here that are easy not to capture on camera, but they're important for anybody that wants to go through this process to understand here. The detail here, I have a fuel filter. A lot of guys will not run a fuel filter because it can be restrictive. This carb is going to need more fuel, pull more fuel. Ultimately, there's a filter in the tank. Anyone who's ever changed out a petcock knows that going up into the tank here is a screen filter. So I already have one filter, ultimately restricting fuel flow. I have a second filter. This can affect performance. I am going to do my first start with this, but I may take this out. But it's another one of those variables to consider. The other thing is I get through here, I have too much fuel line. So we're going to cut an inch off so I can slip it down onto the carb nipple here. And then we're going to put a bolt or two in to hold this, and I think as long as everything is out of the way of heat, we're good to try. All right, I think that's it. Add fuel, kick it. Wish me luck. I have touched a lot of things in here, so a lot of opportunity for things to go not well. I'm putting in 90 ethanol free, mixed at 32:1. Turning the fuel on, looking for leaks. On to reserve. Fuel is pouring into the bowl for the first time. So here we go. Set up the camera. Let's see. That compression was super low. Kill switch on, choke is on. I fired. third kick with the choke on. Let me get a shift shaft on so I can get it in neutral. Yes. Wow. Third kick. That compression tester, I got a feeling that thing is not up to par. 1/4 turn up on the idle. Let's kick it again. I'm going to go off camera for a little bit to deal with getting the gasket maker on the top of the LRD adjustable pipe there, get the rear end tightened in, get my chain on, and I'll stop and circle back if there's anything of interest. But I'm going to put some music on and just do some of the tedious stuff for a little while and circle back, because we're pretty close to first roll on this thing. But I gotta go check just about every bolt on this chassis, because almost nothing is tightened down. And I'll end up putting fluid in the brakes off camera here, just so I have some stopping power. But give me a few and I'll circle back, and I'll circle back if anything pops up that is of interest in this build and not something you've seen 100 times before. Well, always more to do, but the exhaust is sealing up, and we'll see if that holds once it sets up, or if I have to do a little more. I did end up taking the front end of the exhaust back apart to spread everything out about 1 centimeter, get a good layer of the gasket maker on there. Use the same stuff I used on the head, etc., the ultra copper. Set that back in, and then did another layer, kind of working into the groove. Clean that up with a shop rag. So that's how we're looking there. And you know, and there's still a little bit. I wish it was more in there, but I need it to seal up well. So there we go. My axle is now torqued down. The nuts in the back are torqued down. The chain slack is set up the front. The suspension, the A-arms bolts are tightened. I tightened them with just the weight of the quad on the ground. I wasn't sitting on them or anything. Those are tightened down. Toe in, toe out, camber cat, all that is adjusted by sight, which is not the best way to do this, in the sense that I should have myself sitting on there, the rider, so I have to right squat before I adjust my front end, toe in, toe out, etc. I'm eyeballing it right now. And what I'm referring to are the wheels here, pointed in, pointed out, tipped in, tipped out. Ideally, I'd have the weight on here, squatting the suspension before I set that with the tie rods. Didn't have it today, so I'll have more tuning to do there. I do still need to tighten down the nuts so these don't adjust as I start doing heat cycles to break in the motor. And you can see chain slider missing in the back. There's just so many details, but I don't want to get this completely together yet, because we need to do heat cycles on this two-stroke. We need to ride it around kind of mid RPM, warm the motor up, not romp on it, let it cool down. I plan to do that 2 or 3 times, bring it up to temperature, let it cool off, bring it up to temperature, let it cool off. Then I need to retorque all the bolts around the head. So we're talking these guys up here, these guys down here, retorque them back to spec once I've been through those heat cycles. And that'll be a lot easier to do without all the plastics on. So we'll do the heat cycles with it sitting like this. We still have work to do with the electrical system and charging. What I'll end up doing at some point, once I have this, and I'll do it on camera here, but when we're up and idling, I'll get a voltmeter across the red and the black here to see what we're putting out. We should be putting out, you know, over 12 volts, between 12 and 14 to be able to charge a battery sitting down in here. I might find I have to extend these wires, but for right now, everything is taped so I don't short sitting there, because that is the charging system off the golf cart that will ultimately get mounted somewhere around here to a battery. And then off that battery, I'll run into whatever I decide to do for a lighting system. And if I'm really lucky, I'll wire it in here. I also need to test my kill, and we still have the Trail Tech to wire in. And I have rear brakes, but no front brakes. So there's still an awful lot here, but it's looking like a quad, and it's in a place to roll around. So let's do that. Gonna let this sit for a bit so that gasket sealer sets up. And we're going for the first ride around the lawn here. Well, guys, I think this is where we start to talk about the conclusion of the big parts of this build. There'll be some more details to come, but in terms of the big reveal, yeah, this is really what she's going to look like as I get off and riding. I do have, as I always end up in these videos, I have a couple of things to talk about. One of them, exhaust clearance, so I don't melt the plastics. This LRD adjustable belt sits real close, and you see as I've been riding around the lawn, I'm touching. So I ended up doing heat shield tape on here because I am just touching. And I spent some time trying to move around the bolts here, shift this in as best I could. And I got a little bit of give. Plastics are pretty well bolted in here. The other thing that I did behind here, this mounting hardware, oh, that exhaust is still warm. Behind this mounting hardware, I have 3 washers spacing this further off, and I might go to 5 washers, just kind of keep cheating this out. It is really buggy this evening as I'm doing heat cycles on the motor. It's 7 o'clock, it's 93 degrees. We're supposed to be feeling over 100 next couple of days, perhaps even feeling as high as 110. Super high humidity, just miserable, soupy stuff. But let's get the heat cycles on here, and let's retorque some things down. We'll start doing some more riding. I do have to check my jetting. I have not done a plug chop. I need to order a few plugs for that. But right now it feels smooth. And I'll tell you, this blaster compared to that blaster, absolute night and day riding performance. The biggest thing right out of the gate, the suspension. This thing feels nice. It feels softer, but it rides so nice. Rear as well. Thank you to all of you guys who have been following along, subscribing, giving me comments, and coaching me along the way. There's absolutely no way that I would have gotten this to the state it is without the feedback from the forums, comments, coaching, and tips to saying, hey, look, if you do it like that, you might pay for it. Because there's a couple of places in here where I absolutely would have paid for my decisions and had to go back and do it again. Yeah. So, until the next one, I'm going to do some heat cycles.